In all my years as a dentist, I've seen just about everything you can imagine. Cracked molars from bar fights, cavities so deep you could lose a sewing needle in them. Even a man who tried to open a beer bottle with his front teeth and failed spectacularly. But nothing prepared me for last Tuesday. It was a routine appointment. A patient came in complaining of pain in his lower left molar. He said it had been bothering him for weeks, but what struck me was how specific the pain was. Not dull, not aching, sharp, precise, like something was inside the tooth, moving. I took an X-ray. At first I thought the film was corrupted. There was something in the pulp chamber, something small, irregular, and too dense to be any kind of infection or decay. When I told him we'd need to do an extraction, he didn't argue. He just smiled in this strange, relieved way, like I'd confirmed something he'd suspected all along. I numbed the area, made the incision, and began to work. Everything was normal, until I split the tooth. What came out wasn't bone. It wasn't enamel. And it sure as hell wasn't anything that belonged inside a human mouth. I remember staring at it, the suction hose whining beside me, my gloved hands frozen mid-procedure. My assistant asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer, because the thing in my palm was still warm, and it was breathing. I haven't told anyone this before. Not my wife, not my colleagues, not even the assistant who was standing in the same room when it happened. And I need you to promise me something before I go on. Promise me you won't try to track down the patient, the clinic, or whatever it was I found that day. Some things don't just prefer to be left alone. They require it. The reason I'm telling you this at all is because you seem like someone who's seen strange things too. Someone who won't laugh, or call me crazy, or explain it away with something neat and tidy that fits inside a textbook. I'm not looking for an explanation anymore. I just need someone to listen. Since that day, I haven't slept properly. I'll close my eyes, start to drift, and then I'll remember the weight of it in my hand, warm, faintly pulsing, like it had its own heartbeat. I'll remember the way it seemed to push back against my fingers when I tried to adjust my grip, as if it didn't want to be held. And then I'll hear it, this soft, wet, clicking sound, like two pieces of porcelain tapping together in the dark. That's when my eyes snap open, and I check the same corner of the bedroom every time. Always the same corner, always empty. At least empty when I'm looking directly at it. I've been a dentist for nearly 15 years. I'm not a thrill seeker, not an adventurer. My life is supposed to be predictable. Cleanings, fillings, extractions, the occasional root canal, maybe a crown if someone's had a bad week. Dentistry is supposed to be routine, safe. That's part of why I chose it. You don't expect surprises in this job, at least not the kind that stay with you. But when I think back to that Tuesday morning, I remember the look in my patient's eyes when I told him I'd have to extract the tooth. It wasn't fear, it wasn't relief, it was recognition, as though he'd been waiting for me to confirm what he already knew. Since then, I've tried to find answers quietly. I can't exactly go public with something like this. If I report it officially, the case will get pulled apart by people who won't see anything except a human tooth and a confused dentist. The X-rays will get lost in transit. I'll be called in for psychological evaluation. My license could be suspended. So I research at night, in my office, when the clinic is locked and no one's around to notice. I've read everything I could find about strange calcifications, pulp stones, rare cysts that form inside teeth. I've combed through forums about unexplained medical findings, creeping through archives for anything that sounded remotely similar. But none of it matches what I saw. None of it explains the warmth, the faint movement, or the way it made the room feel smaller while I was holding it. The strangest part is that the more I search, the more the trail seems to erase itself. Pages vanish from my browser history before I can bookmark them. Threads on obscure forums that I've read one night are gone the next. It's like the information is retracting, pulling away. I started printing everything, just in case. But a few weeks ago, I came into my office early and found every single page shredded and scattered across the floor. The lock on my door hadn't been broken. My assistant swore no one had been inside. It was as if the paper had destroyed itself. I didn't tell her the truth about the extraction. She asked about it a couple days later, casually, while we were prepping for another patient. I just said there'd been an unusual calcification in the pulp chamber, something I'd be sending to the lab. She didn't question it, but then she hesitated, like she wanted to add something else. She said that, while I'd been frozen there, staring at what I'd pulled out, the patient had been whispering under his breath. She couldn't make out the words, said it didn't sound like English, or any language she recognized. She also mentioned a smell, faint, metallic, but wrong. Not like blood or infection, something older, like metal, that had been buried underground for years. I've thought about calling the patient. I keep his chart in the top drawer of my desk, away from the others. Sometimes I'll take it out, just to look at his name, his address. Every time, without fail, I get this crawling sensation up the back of my neck, like someone is leaning over me, reading along. I'll slam the drawer shut and tell myself I'll never try again. But the next week, I'll find myself opening it anyway. That's why I'm telling you this now. Not because I think you can solve it. Not because I think there's a cure for whatever this is. But because I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the only one who's seen something like this. And maybe, if someone else hears my story, they'll recognize it. Maybe they've seen it too. And maybe they'll understand the one thing. I'm starting to believe. Once you've seen what's inside, it finds its way back to you. I don't think it's just an object. I think it's a piece of something. And I don't think that something was ever meant to be here. If you've ever come across anything like this, if you've ever found something inside a person's body that shouldn't exist, something that felt alive, you know exactly why I can't let this go. But I'm begging you, don't go looking for it. Don't pry open the tooth. Don't follow the clicking sound. And for God's sake, don't listen if it starts whispering your name. Because once it knows you, I'm not sure there's any way to make it forget. My clinic isn't in the middle of nowhere, but it might as well be. We're on the edge of town, tucked between an empty lot and a laundromat that's been temporarily closed for the last 7 years. The building itself is older than it looks from the outside. The brick facade was added sometime in the 80s, but underneath, the foundation is early 20th century. The basement walls are stone, rough and uneven, damp enough in winter to make your clothes smell faintly of earth if you spend too long down there. It's quiet here. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. The other practices I've worked in had the usual background noise. Kids crying in the waiting room, people coughing, the hum of traffic outside. But in this place, even when the reception area is full, it feels muffled, like there's a layer of air between you and the rest of the world. Step inside, and the sound of the street dies instantly, as if the door seals out more than just the weather. When I first took over the practice, the realtor told me the location was perfect for patients who didn't like busy, chaotic offices. She said the quiet was soothing. I've since realized it's the kind of quiet that doesn't soothe at all. It presses in. The building's layout is strange. The halls don't run straight. They taper slightly, so that when you look down them, the end seems farther away than it should be. Exam rooms don't line up evenly either. Some have more wall space on one side than the other, as if they were carved out of mismatched blocks. Room 4 is the one I use the least. Not for any professional reason. The light in there is fine. The chair works. The equipment's functional. But every time I stand in that room, I feel like someone is behind me. I'll turn around and see nothing but the countertop, the cabinets, the sterilizer, and yet the feeling doesn't leave. I've caught my own reflection in the cabinet glass, looking slightly wrong. Not drastically, not horror movie wrong, but off. Like my expression isn't quite the one I'm making. Or the angle of my head doesn't match. The staff joke about room for being haunted. They say the clock in there stops at least once a week. They've replaced the batteries, swapped the clock entirely, and still, sooner or later, it just freezes. Always at 2:17. The patient from that Tuesday had been in before, but not often. His name was Michael, mid-30s, thin, polite, in a way that felt deliberate, like every word he spoke had been weighed in his head first. He never smiled much, which made sense for someone with chronic dental pain. But there was something else in his eyes. On the day of the appointment, he arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late. The receptionist swears she never saw him come through the front door. She just looked up from her desk, and he was standing there. He didn't carry a phone. That struck me immediately, because almost everyone has one in their hand, even in a dentist's waiting room. When I asked if he'd filled out his medical history online, he said, "I don't go online. No apology, no explanation. Just a fact." There are rumors about this part of town, strange ones. You'll hear older locals talk about how the streetlights sometimes flicker in a pattern, like Morse code, and then someone you know will disappear for a couple days without explanation. They'll come back acting normal, but with gaps in their memory. Sometimes they'll move away shortly after. A few of my patients have mentioned the shadow in the lot, a vague shape they've seen moving between the clinic and the old laundromat when they've driven past at night. Always at the corner of their eye. Always gone when they look directly. I never put much stock in those stories. This is America. Every town has its urban legends. But after what happened with Michael, I can't help thinking about them. That morning, something felt off, even before he sat in the chair. The usual waiting room noise, shuffling magazines, coughs, the fish tank filter humming, seemed muted, like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the sound. The air felt thick, too. Not warm, just heavy enough that I noticed my own breathing. I led him back to room 4, without thinking. Later, I'd wonder if that was a mistake. Once he was seated, I put on my gloves, adjusted the overhead light, and asked him to describe the pain. He spoke softly, choosing each word like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Sharp, precise, like something was inside the tooth and wanted out. I told him we'd start with an X-ray. That's when I noticed the birds. We keep a few potted plants on the windowsill, and in summer, sparrows will sometimes perch there for a moment before darting off. This time, 2 sparrows landed, then froze. Completely still. Not like they were resting, but like they'd been switched off. Their tiny chests didn't rise. Their eyes didn't blink. I looked away for just a second to check the image plate, and when I looked back, they were gone. The X-ray came out wrong. There was an object inside the pulp chamber, irregular, too dense to be infection or decay, with sharp edges that didn't belong in human anatomy. For a moment I thought the film was damaged. I took another shot. Same result. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck. That sensation you get when someone's watching you from just outside your peripheral vision. Michael was staring straight at me, not at the monitor. His expression didn't change, but something about the stillness in his face made me uneasy. I told him extraction would be the safest option. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask about alternatives, just nodded. As I prepped the anesthesia, the clock in room 4 stopped. I didn't see it happen. I only noticed when my assistant came in later and mentioned it. But I remember feeling, in that exact moment, like time had slowed slightly, like the seconds between my own movements had stretched. You work in medicine long enough, you learn to trust your instincts. That day, every instinct I had was telling me there was something wrong with more than just the tooth. I didn't know yet what I'd find when I split it open, but I knew, even before the first cut, that whatever was inside wasn't supposed to be there. When I began the extraction, I told myself to stay focused. Just another procedure, an unusual case, sure, but still a tooth. Enamel, dentin, pulp, something I could handle. But the moment the drill touched that molar, Michael let out the faintest exhale. Not pain, something else. Almost relief. I'd given him more than enough anesthetic. He shouldn't have been able to feel much of anything, but his eyes stayed locked on mine the entire time I worked. Normally, patients close their eyes or stare at the ceiling light. He didn't blink as I sectioned the tooth. A faint vibration buzzed through the drill, not from the motor, but from inside the tooth itself. Like I was cutting into something that resisted, something that pushed back. My assistant must have felt it too, because she paused mid-movement and frowned at me, silently asking if something was wrong. When the tooth split, I saw it, the thing. It was lodged deep in the pulp chamber, slick and oddly smooth, about the size of a peppercorn but shaped wrong, not spherical, not organic. It had ridges, fine ones, etched like grooves in a record. The grooves pulsed faintly, as if something was flowing through them. I froze. The suction hose whined beside me, pulling away saliva and blood, but the sound seemed far off. The air in the room felt heavier, like the oxygen had thickened. My gloves stuck faintly to the metal of my tools, even though there was no blood on them. Michael whispered something then, a short phrase, low and wet. I couldn't catch the words. My assistant glanced at me nervously. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the thing in my palm, faintly moving. I hadn't even realized I'd taken it home with me. It was still in the small, sealed specimen jar. I'd absent-mindedly slipped into my coat pocket instead of sending to the lab. Around 2:17 a.m., I heard it. 3 soft knocks, not on the door, not on the wall, from inside my bedroom. They were slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. I turned on the light. The room was empty. The jar was still on my dresser, but the thing inside had shifted position. The next few days blurred together. I went to work, saw patients, pretended everything was normal, but small things kept happening. One morning, the clinic door was already unlocked when I arrived. No sign of forced entry, nothing missing. But in room 4, the chair had been rotated to face the corner instead of the overhead light. In the break room, the refrigerator door stood open. Every carton, every bottle, every snack wrapper had been turned upside down. The fish tank in the waiting room went silent one afternoon. The filter stopped humming. When I looked closer, the fish were frozen mid-swim, completely still, not dead, just paused. Their tiny eyes didn't blink. At night, the knocks kept coming, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, always slow, always from somewhere just out of reach. I'd get up, check the apartment, find nothing, but objects would be moved. A chair shifted an inch to the left, a drawer half open, the jar sometimes sitting on the opposite side of the room from where I'd left it, and then the dreams started in them. I was back in room 4. The clock was stuck at 2:17. Michael sat in the chair, mouth open, but his teeth weren't teeth anymore. Each one had been replaced by dozens of the tiny ridged objects. They clicked together when he spoke, making that same wet porcelain sound I'd heard before. In the dream, he'd say things I didn't understand, words that weren't English, weren't anything I recognized. But the longer he spoke, the more the room seemed to tilt. The walls bent inward. The light above us flickered like it was struggling to stay on. I'd wake up sweating, my jaw aching like I'd been clenching it all night. And sometimes, the words from the dream would still be echoing in my head. I'd catch myself mouthing them without meaning to. The jar didn't stay sealed for long. One morning, I woke up to find the lid sitting neatly beside it. Not unscrewed, but placed there, as if by careful hands. The object inside was gone. That same day, a patient came in for a cleaning, and I swear I saw it deep inside his molar. Just for a second, in the reflection of my dental mirror. I dropped the mirror. Things escalated after that. Doors at the clinic began opening on their own. Not slowly, like with a draft, but suddenly, the latch clicking. The door swinging wide, as if someone had pushed it from the other side. I stopped using room 4 altogether, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched followed me into every room. The clicking sound began to follow me home. I'd hear it faintly while brushing my teeth at night, tapping in sync with my own movements. I started wearing headphones just to drown it out, but sometimes I'd feel a vibration through the floor, a faint, rhythmic pulse, like the building itself had a heartbeat. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door open. I live alone. I lock it every night. Something moved in the corner. Not fast, not threatening, just there, watching. I couldn't make out details, just a faint outline against the darker shadows. I thought I heard it whisper, the same rhythm, the same alien cadence from my dreams. I blinked, and the corner was empty. But on my dresser, the jar was back, the lid sealed, the thing inside pulsing. It wasn't just my nights that suffered. My days began to blur. I'd reach for a dental instrument and find it missing, only to discover it later in a different room, perfectly sterilized. The machine once powered on by itself. The screen already displaying an image I hadn't taken, an empty dental chair, with something small and dark resting on the headrest. Patients started canceling appointments without explanation. Some came in once and never returned. A few said nothing, but I'd catch them glancing toward the corner of the room, eyes narrowing, as if they could see something I couldn't. I began locking the jar in my desk drawer at the clinic, but every time I did, I'd find it back on the counter the next morning. Sometimes the grooves in its surface were arranged differently, as though they'd been rewritten overnight. The final straw came a week later. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of the knocks, louder now, echoing like they were inside my own skull. I sat up, dizzy, and found my bedside table empty. The jar was gone. In the silence that followed, I heard a faint clicking from the bathroom. I didn't want to go in, but my feet moved on their own. The mirror above the sink was fogged though. I hadn't run the water. In the condensation, words were etched, the same ones from my dreams, the ones I could never translate but somehow understood. They meant, let it in. I didn't plan on going back into the clinic after hours again. After everything that had happened, after the jar, the mirror, the dreams I had promised myself I would avoid room for entirely. But that night, after seeing the words on my bathroom mirror, I knew I had to go. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't curiosity. Not exactly. It was more like a pull, a pressure in my chest that wouldn't let up until I gave in. The streets were dead quiet when I drove across town. My key turned in the lock without a sound, as if the tumblers were expecting me. I didn't bother turning on the main lights. I just followed the dim emergency glow down the narrow, tapering hall toward room 4. The air felt different the moment. I stepped inside, damp, almost humid, carrying the faint metallic tang of blood that had no business lingering. My shoes stuck faintly to the tile. The clock on the wall read 2:17. I glanced at my watch. It was 11:46 p.m. That's when I noticed the corner. Not just the usual shadow this time, but something in the shadow. A faint outline of a chair. Not the padded dental chair, but something wooden, older, ornate, like it belonged in another century. And in that chair, a figure. I couldn't make out details, only the posture, upright, waiting. My breath fogged in the air. Though the clinic's heating was still on, the figure didn't move. My eyes drifted down toward the base of the wall, where the vinyl cove molding met the floor. There was a small gap, no wider than a pencil, and in that gap, something metallic glinted in the faint light. I knelt, ignoring the sting in my knees against the cold tile, and pulled at the edge. A section of the baseboard came away in my hand. Behind it wasn't drywall, but old wood splintered, dark with age, and between the boards, a slit just wide enough to wedge my fingers into. The board came loose with a long, aching groan. Dust billowed out in a choking cloud, carrying the scent of something ancient and forgotten. Beneath the board was a cavity no bigger than a shoebox. Inside, wrapped in brittle, yellowing cloth, was a book. It wasn't a medical text. The cover was dark leather, cracked and peeling, the spine warped with moisture. When I opened it, the first page was filled with handwriting, spidery, uneven, like the letters had been etched by someone whose hand shook constantly. The entries weren't dated in years or months. Instead, they began with times, always. 2:17. Every single page. The ink had bled in places, faded in others, but the words I could read made my stomach tighten. They spoke of seeds, planted in the teeth of both the willing and the unwilling, of how these seeds would root unseen until the host was ready, of the choir that would come for them when the time was right, guided by the clicking. One passage stopped me cold. Once placed, the seed cannot be removed without waking it. If woken, it will seek its origin. If it cannot return, it will grow toward the nearest voice. I turned the page, and a small scrap of something slid out and landed in my lap. At first I thought it was a dried leaf, but when I held it up to the light, I saw the same fine ridges, the same faint pulse I'd seen in Michael's tooth. The later pages of the journal were different. The handwriting lost its structure. Sentences trailed off into jagged scratches. Strange symbols appeared in the margins, symbols I recognized from my bathroom mirror. My skin prickled when I realized I also recognized certain words between them. They were the same phrases Michael had whispered during the extraction. Halfway through a page, the handwriting changed. It became cleaner, steadier, more modern. It was mine. The words were written in my style, exactly the way I looped my G's, the way I slash my T's. I don't remember writing them, but the sentences were there in my hand. The first one is mine now. It remembers me. I will carry the next willingly. The pen I was holding slipped from my fingers. My pulse thundered. In my ears, and in the corner of my vision, the figure in the wooden chair seemed to lean forward, ever so slightly. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave the book there and pretend none of this existed, but my body moved on its own, kneeling again, reaching deeper into the cavity beneath the floorboards. My fingertips brushed against something slick and cold. It was larger than the seed I'd removed from Michael's tooth, the size of a clenched fist. Its ridged surface glistened wetly, and the grooves weren't random. They formed shapes, words, my name. The air in the room grew heavier, pressing against my chest until it was hard to breathe. I could hear it now, the clicking, not from the seed in my hand, but from all around me. Inside the walls, beneath the floor, above the ceiling. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, answering each other in slow, deliberate rhythm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting the time. Instead, the screen showed a black, glassy reflection, like a mirror. Only it wasn't my reflection, it was Michael. His mouth hung open, but every tooth was gone. In their place were dozens of those ridged seeds, each one pulsing in perfect sync with the clicking. He mouthed something I couldn't hear. Then the screen went black again. The next thing I remember, I was outside, sitting in my car 2 streets away. The journal still in my lap, and the seed scrap clutched tight in my fist. My watch read 2:17. My hand smelled faintly metallic. I told myself I'd burn the journal, destroy it before I read any more. But it's still under my bed right now, wrapped in the same brittle cloth. Because part of me needs to know the rest, and part of me thinks it's already too late. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the clinic again. I told myself I'd burn the journal, crush the seed scrap, and pretend it had all been a hallucination. But the clicking didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. Not constant, just enough to remind me it was still there. A few beats in the dead of night. A faint tap against my wall during dinner. Once, impossibly, from inside my pillow. By the 3rd night, without sleep, I decided I couldn't stay in town. I packed a bag in silence, careful not to touch the journal, and left my apartment just before midnight. The streets were empty, the kind of empty that feels staged, as though someone had swept the world clean for my exit. I drove until the streetlights vanished and the road narrowed into the dark stretch that leads out toward the edge of the county. My plan was simple. Keep going until the sun came up, then keep going some more. But an hour later, I saw the same intersection I'd passed at the start of my trip. Same leaning street sign, same flickering light. I turned in the opposite direction, certain I'd made a wrong turn. 15 minutes later, I passed the same sign again. The third time I saw it, I stopped the car. The clicking was coming from the dashboard now, faint but unmistakable, synced with the pulsing of my hazard lights. I left the car and walked. My shoes crunched on gravel that seemed to stretch endlessly. I thought I heard something moving in the tree line beside me, not following exactly, but keeping pace. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked again, it resumed. The air smelled faintly metallic. The road eventually ended in a place I didn't recognize. Not the highway, not even a dirt path, just a clearing. In the center was a single chair, wooden, ornate, exactly like the one I'd seen in room 4. On the seat was the jar. The lid was off. The seat inside was larger now, almost filling the jar's circumference, its grooves deep and deliberate, like they'd been carved by patient hands. My hands. The forest around me began to click. Hundreds of tiny, deliberate knocks, not from one direction, but from all of them, surrounding me. My skin prickled as I realized the sound wasn't random, it was forming words. It said my name. I backed away, but the ground beneath me felt wrong, soft in some places, too solid in others, as though it wasn't soil at all. Something moved under the surface, slow and steady, tracking me. I turned to run, but the clearing didn't recede. The chair stayed exactly where it was, no matter how many steps I took. The air thickened. My breath came shallow. The clicking in the trees gave way to whispers. The same rhythm, the same impossible language from my dreams. I understood it now, not word for word, but enough. It was telling me to sit. I don't remember choosing to, but I was in the chair. The jar was gone. The seed was in my palm, warm now, almost trembling. The grooves in its surface shifted under my thumb, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. My name again, but followed by something else, a word I didn't recognize, one that made my teeth ache just thinking it. Something touched the back of my neck, not a hand, not exactly, more like the weight of a thought settling into place. My jaw tightened, unbidden, and I felt a pressure in my gums, deep, grinding, like roots pushing through bone. I think I screamed, but no sound came out. The pressure subsided after a moment, replaced by a strange relief, like an itch finally scratched. I ran my tongue along my teeth. They felt normal, almost. When I looked down, the seed in my palm was gone. I woke up in my bed. My car was parked outside, keys on the table, bag unpacked. The journal was on my nightstand, open to a page I hadn't seen before. The handwriting was mine. The entry read, "The next one will be ready soon. I'll know by the clicking." I touched my jaw again, running my fingers along the gum line. Something faint pulsed beneath the surface. So slight, I could almost believe I imagined it. Almost the clicking has stopped for now. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up to the faintest sensation, like something turning over in its sleep. I think it's waiting for me to speak. I haven't been able to sleep since that night. Not really. I close my eyes and for a few minutes, I can almost convince myself I might drift off, but then I hear it. That soft, deliberate clicking. Sometimes faint, far away, like it's coming from another room, in another building. Other times, it's closer. So close that I can feel it in my jaw, in the roots of my teeth. I tell myself it's nothing, that it's just the memory of a sound. But some nights, it feels like it's waiting for me to answer. I've tried everything. I moved apartments, changed my phone number, switched dental clinics. I threw away every piece of clothing I wore that night, every tool from the clinic that might have been touched, but none of it matters. You can't throw away something that's under your skin. I think once you hold one of those seeds, really hold it, you're marked, or maybe you're changed. I'm not sure which. Some mornings I wake up and swear my teeth feel different, the way they sit in my mouth, the way they bite down. And sometimes, when I'm tired enough, I catch myself mouthing words in that language from the dreams. I don't even know I'm doing it until I taste blood. You've been quiet this whole time, listening. I can tell you're the kind of person who listens deeply, the kind of person who wouldn't laugh at this. Maybe that's why I'm telling you everything? Maybe I think that if someone else knows, it won't just be mine to carry anymore. Or maybe I'm just passing the weight along to you, and I'm too far gone to feel guilty about it. I still dream of room 4, the clock stuck at 2:17, the figure in the wooden chair, the journal lying open on the tray beside me, and the pages are always moving, flipping on their own. When I look down, the handwriting is mine. It's always mine, and it's always talking about the next one. Sometimes I wake up with my mouth open, jaw aching, the taste of metal on my tongue. Once, I woke up with a thin groove in the enamel of my molar, as though something had been pressing against it from the inside. I don't think it's just the seed anymore. I think there's more of them now, and I don't know what they're waiting for, but I can feel it coming closer. Please, if you ever find yourself somewhere that feels wrong, turn around. If you walk into a room and it's colder than it should be, if you hear clicking where there shouldn't be any sound, leave. If you ever see something in a tooth that doesn't belong there, something too smooth, too perfect, too alive, don't touch it. Don't even look at it for too long. And if someone you love starts complaining about a toothache, I'm sorry, because I think that's how it finds you. Have you ever had a toothache that didn't feel like a normal toothache? Not sharp, not aching, but deep, like it was humming inside your jaw. If you have, I need you to tell me. Comment it. Describe exactly what it felt like, even if you think it sounds crazy. I read every single one, and if you've ever heard that clicking faint, steady, like a clock with no hands, I need you to write that down too. Just be careful how much you describe. The more you put into words, the more it notices. I know some of you listening right now think this is just a story. You'll finish this, close your eyes, and sleep without a second thought. But some of you, the ones who are leaning in right now, who can feel the way your teeth don't quite fit together, the same way they did before, you already know this isn't fiction. You can feel it. So tell me if you've had the dreams. If you've woken up with a taste you can't explain. If you've seen something in a mirror that wasn't quite you, write it in the comments. Maybe if enough of us put the pieces together, we'll understand what it wants. Just don't listen to the next story alone. And if you hear clicking tonight, don't answer it.